Welcome to St. Theresa's. We're so happy to see all of you this evening. This is our second in our series on forgiveness. We have with us tonight Mr. John Sage. He is the founder and executive director of Bridges to Life. Bridges to Life is a program that takes victims of crime into prison and to show the inmates the dramatic effect crime has on the community. Bridges to Life reduces crime and helps make our community a safer place. And John will talk to you more about that and about the tragedy in his own life and how he came to begin this special program. John, we're happy to have you.
Thank you. I got the switch turned on, so I guess you can hear me.
We can.
That's good. We're glad to be here. I see some old friends and hopefully some new friends here tonight, and appreciate all you coming out to hear this discussion. I understand you've been having a series, or will have had and will have a series on forgiveness here at St. Theresa's during Lent. Forgiveness is a big topic. I saw a little Lenten prayer the other day, and I'd like to start off with it. It picked up this little Lenten missalette in church, and this prayer was a little loud, I think. That's because I do. I got you. We start with this prayer. Merciful. It's too high?
No, keep touching it. If I may. I suggested it higher, okay. Sorry.
Well, these priests are professional with these microphones, you see. I'm not a professional microphone guy. And by the way, tonight's topic is forgiveness. Tony Mandola said to say that if you don't really appreciate or like what I say, that please forgive me, okay? Merciful Father, we are made in your image and your likeness. Through the power of your Spirit, help us to be ministers of your mercy and love. Too easily we judge, condemn, and fail to forgive. Heal us, strengthen us in your ways. One reason that prayer attracted my attention is the elements it spoke about of mercy, love, and judgment. I think those elements come into play a lot in forgiveness, or lack of forgiveness. I think a lot of lack of forgiveness and inability to forgive involves judgment, judgment of other people also, which I'll talk about a little later. I think difficulty to forgive involves the innate human need to be right. And as long as you think you got to be right, it's hard to forgive, and you can't let go of it. What I want to do tonight is kind of walk you through my journey of forgiveness, in particular with the murder of my sister, and kind of how that all unfolded and developed into something that I never expected. There's some people in the audience here tonight that actually knew my sister real well. My sister Marilyn, she was a year, 18 months younger than me. And I went to St. Thomas High School, and she went to St. Agnes, and we were a year apart in school. We were fourth and fifth in a family of 8 children, and we were very, very close. We were kind of in the middle of the pack. And we were kind of soulmates, so to speak. We got into some trouble together, and we had all the same friends together, and we went on and shared a car in college together, and I'll go back and forth a little bit, time sequence, and I had this old gold Chevelle, we called it. It was 3-speed on the column, and the guys would say, you don't need to go work out the weights, just go drive your car around the block, and but Marilyn could drive this car. And we both had a set of keys, and she'd come get the car whenever, and I'd leave a whole laundry basket full of dirty clothes in there, and she knew it. She knew it. It was all, and she'd bring it back in a couple of days. My clothes would all be washed and folded, and we had that kind of relationship that we helped each other a lot. Probably the most meaningful story, long-lasting story, is it has some humor to it. Before I get into the part that's not so humorous, is when I was a sophomore in high school at St. Thomas, and she was a freshman at St. Agnes, she comes home the first 30 days or so and says, Johnny, there's this gorgeous blonde and there's this gorgeous brunette, and would you go out with them? I said, well, you know, twist my arm, you know. That's a tough question, but tough duty, but I'll do that. I'll do that. So she arranged all this, and I went out with each of them several times. That was 1962 or 3, and I'm still going out with the brunette. So 46 years ago, 47 years ago. So as I look back, I see the relationship was so close, she even picked out my life mate for me. And she and Francis were extremely close friends in high school. They had a group of girls they called the We Five, and they took this beautiful picture a year before she got killed at their 25th graduation reunion, excuse me. And there was 5 of them, and they were all great friends. And one other girl wanted to be part of it, and they didn't want to change the name, so they called it the We Five Plus One. So one girl was always known as Plus One. So, but anyway, we had this wonderful relationship. And what happened to Marilyn in 1993 was a random murder. She lived in townhouses over by the old Houston Post off Newcastle, right there in a nice area, gallery area, not a high crime area. And she had bought some clothes at Tootsie's that day. She was a real estate agent. She also worked, had a part-time job at Damien's as a hostess. And Damien wouldn't let her come on weekends because she attracted too many people. He made her work during the week. It's a true story. And she was kind of one of these people that stirred up a lot of things. And anyway, Marilyn had a real estate closing. She went and bought her some clothes. She left half the clothes in the car and went back in her apartment there and was going to go back and get the rest. These 2 19-year-old strangers, as testimony showed, were stalking a parking lot to find a skinny woman, do whatever they had, and steal her car and go to Bay City. Well, they followed Marilyn into the apartment. Of course, she wouldn't lock the door. And they came in, they had a little paring knife with them, and they hid and they waited, and she came out and they startled her. And the guy was about my size, and he jumped on her and hit her and pinned her down with his knees on her shoulders, and actually she was screaming, and he started stabbing her with his paring knife. And the other killer, who interestingly was a female, went and got the whole butcher block of knives out of the kitchen. I'm telling you some of these details so you'll understand where I went from there. Got the whole butcher block, and the detective said there were 7 knives on the floor when he went in there. I guess she was stabbed with several. The final blow was they put a big butcher knife through her neck, and then she was still alive, and they hit her over the head with a statue of a woman and a child, and then they wrapped a plastic bag around her head to suffocate her. So the horror of what she went through her last few minutes of life haunted me like nothing's ever haunted me in my life. I went through every emotion that you can think of, from shock to disbelief to anger to rage to revenge to hate, to literally, in the only time in my life I really, in my internal man, would really feel like I wanted to kill these people. And that was not a good feeling at all. It didn't fit very well with my previous life, and wasn't going to fit too good with my future life. They caught the 2 killers down in Bay City, where they said they were going to go. Someone called Crime Stoppers and said that they had heard of this plot that they were making. And they caught them about 48 hours later. The guy gave an oral confession, and they sort of used that to get the girl to convict her too. They both ended up being charged with capital murder, death penalty sentence charges. They didn't have a lot of prior charges, but they had enough to show us a series of things going on, and they were part of crime. The reason the DA went that serious was just because of the heinous nature of the way they killed her and the unnecessary nature. They could have tied her up and done a lot of things and stolen her car. So anyway, the guy went to trial about a year later and was convicted and went to death row. I was in the courtroom about from here to halfway back to the church from him, and I could literally see myself strangling the guy and choking him to death. I had this mental image, and our body almost just started taking steps that way to do this. And a little voice, I guess the Holy Spirit, or my better sense, said, "Stop, you've got a wife and 2 kids." And that wouldn't have been a good idea, and it wouldn't have been the right thing to do at all. So he was convicted, went to death row. A year later, the girl went to trial. They proved through the handprints on the door and the handprints on the knife that she actually participated in the killing, which is very rare for a female to participate. And she went to death row. Just to give you an idea about females on death, there's only 8 women on death row in Texas. There's only 52 in the United States, so she's in a pretty small crowd. One of the struggles I had morally, which complicated things, at that time there was no life without parole in the state of Texas, and I was very angry about that. The next sentence other than death penalty would have been capital life, eligible for parole in 35 years. Well, they were 19, eligible for parole at 54 years old. I honestly believe that the woman was the catalyst in this whole. She was the planner. I hate to say, I kind of believe she was possessed. When you would see her in the voir dire and you get close to her, she'd turn around the courtroom and wave at her friends, say, "Call me." She never had any remorse. She was very flippant about it. The night they had her in jail at first, and she actually bragged about it. And they had to separate her and put her in isolation because the other inmates were scared of her in the county jail while she was awaiting trial. Through my work, I met a couple of guys that knew her. They called me aside. One of them fed her lunch, he said, for 3 or 4 months, and she was in a padded cell. Said one day she'd be real lucid, and the next day she'd just be kind of crazy. Met another guy that said that she was good friends with his fiance. He said, "I bought her baby's pablum a month before she killed your sister." She said she was sorry from the time this is an inmate telling me this, she was sorry from the time she was 11. Of course, there were reasons she was sorry. She was raised pretty tough. And so I just didn't, I wrestled a lot with the idea of her ever having the right to get out. I would have been much more comfortable with life without parole than any other sentence. That's kind of another topic. The journey I went through toward forgiveness, I guess, lasted about 5 years. You kind of go in stages. I don't know if you ever get to that 100%, something will remind you sometime. I can relate. I think I've gotten there, but it took a number of years. I went into more of a spiritual journey. I became somewhat cynical about the world and people. I thought, you can walk down the street and a stranger can come up and kill you. Can I trust anybody except people I knew real well? I became, I don't want to say recluse, but I certainly became more introverted and more reserved and withdrawn than I normally was. Went through a real period of anxiety, led into a serious depression. I was not really able to function real well. Couldn't work full time. I was working part time. This went on for several years. During that period of slow time, I read a lot of books, and I started studying the Bible a lot. I read 9 or 10 Henry Nouwen books. I read Merton. I got a bibliography. One time I sent it to a guy. He said, "Wow, you got about 70 books that were really good, a lot of good things." Started reading Richard Rohr. Read a lot of things that helped me a lot get out of this depression, get out of this place of hate, anger. It wasn't really, I was the prisoner. I was the prisoner of all that. So fast forward to about 1998, someone called me and they said that 2020 television wanted to call and interview me. The reason was the girl killer had decided she wanted to waive all her appeals and be executed. I think it was a ploy. If you remember, Carla Faye Tucker was executed, was the first woman in 100 years. Well, this woman was going to come a month or two behind that, and I think she thought if they gave another female any leeway, they might give her. I don't know what. It was a real strange legal issue because she had the right to go back to her appeal process, I think literally till they had her strapped down on the gurney. She didn't do that, but I mean, I think they could have literally been 5 minutes before the execution. She should have said, "Wait, I don't think this is such a good idea." Well, about 30 days before the execution, she decided that wasn't a good idea. And she's still on death row now, and it's been going on 18 years. And her name is Erica Shepard. Anyway, so they wanted to call when this execution was scheduled, And I said, yeah, I'll talk to him. And so they called, and the lady said, well, are you excited about this execution? I said, no, I'm not really excited about them putting someone to death. It's not going to really solve the problem. My sister's still. And she kept trying to rile me up. And during the course of that conversation, she just wasn't getting what she wanted. And I could tell. I said, look, if you're looking for somebody who wants to inject the drugs, I'm just not the right person. I said, she said, I'll call you back in 2 days. Well, that was 12 years ago. She never called me back. But when I hung up the phone, I realized that I was in a different place than I was 5 years, 3 years, 4 years before. And I don't think it happened that day. It happened gradually over those period of years. I was not angry. I didn't want to hurt this lady. I didn't want to kill anybody. I had gotten to a place of a big place of forgiveness, and certainly the first major step toward forgiveness. In the meantime, the male killer that same year died of AIDS on death row, or on the way to John Seeley. And so he died of that disease. I had an agreement that we were going to meet, and he had agreed to meet one-on-one, and he didn't live long enough to go through the process. And I said, I'm fine, I'll meet with him if he wants to. The girl killer of us had 4 people go see her. She has no interest in meeting. She's never taken any responsibility for what she's done. She's never expressed sorrow. She wouldn't even talk to the couple of the people that went up there to talk to her about it. So she's pretty tough customer. If I was the governor, I guess I would change her sentence to life without parole if it was a lock solid deal. But she's on death row up there. But the forgiveness issue of my situation, I was telling someone about what happened. And I was telling someone about, hey, I think I really got into this place of forgiveness, and it really felt like a ton of bricks were off of me, and it was really an epiphany moment, a changing moment. And they said, well, I heard about this program that they're going to do in a prison out here in Sugar Land, and they're going to take people that have been affected by crime and meet with inmates inside a prison. The prison was called Jester 2 at that time. It's a small prison, and now it's called Carol Vance Prison. And the project was called Sycamore Tree. It was named after the scripture in Luke where Zacchaeus got in the tree and saw Jesus, and Jesus went to his house and forgave him, and Zacchaeus paid back fourfold and gave half the rest of his earnings. It was about repentance, forgiveness, and reconciliation, salvation. So I did that program, and I was one of 12 volunteers. That was way before Bridges to Life was ever started. And I was a participant, and we sat in groups, and we had a one-page outline, and the topics we covered were accountability, responsibility, confession, repentance, forgiveness, reconciliation, restitution. But the heart of the bullseye of the program was really, I think, forgiveness and repentance, which is change. So I did that program, and it was a 90-day program, and 12 weeks I think we met, and I saw things that were amazing. I saw guys really change. One in particular guy, by the name of Ron Flowers, he was in for murder. He was about to get out, and he said, I did not murder. He said, I didn't do it. It was a 27-year-old girl killed. He said, as a matter of fact, I don't even want to know her name. The lady next to me that had had a loved one murdered right in front of her just starts bawling, crying. And the reason was it told her that the person that killed her loved one didn't even care enough to want to know her name. It wasn't the same person, but the simulation was there. We didn't meet with people that hurt us. We met with people that hurt other people. So by the end of the project, this Ron Flowers admitted that he killed the girl. He asked to pray for her family. He changed. His eyes changed. His body language changed. The way he talked changed. And after the program was over, they had a meeting with Miss Washington, the mother of the girl that he murdered, and they had a reconciliation. And when he got out of prison, he went over to her house and mowed her yard, and she died since. And Ron's doing fine. He's never come back to prison. So that impacted, and I saw a lot of other changes. So out of that, the seed was planted that I saw the power of this process of bringing people in that had been affected by crime, and not every volunteer had been affected by crime. Some were facilitators and some were what we call victim volunteers. And we define victim as anybody that's had their life dramatically impacted by a crime, where you can look back and say, hey, my life was different after that happened. So out of that seed, God just kind of kept pulling on my shoulder, and about within less than 12 months, I founded Bridges to Life not really knowing where that was going to go. In 1999, we worked with people that were in the sycamore tree. We worked in conjunction with them, and the whole time we were I was starting to write curriculum that we could develop this program and use. And we worked with 41 inmates that year, just to give you a benchmark of where we started. We branched out. We were working with them. The next year in 2000, when we found one warden that would allow us to come to the prison. I've got a saying in prisons, it's not easy to give away something good. Working in prisons is very difficult. It's a lot of barriers. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of security issues. There's a lot of people that don't want you to come in there. It makes more work for them. You have to fight through. It takes a lot of energy. You have to fight through a lot of things. So anyway, as warden in Beaumont said, yeah, we'll let y'all close. So we got some volunteers in Beaumont, and I would drive over there every week. And literally each week, I didn't know if they were going to let us back in the prison. And I'd be driving back down I-10. Those of you who've driven to Beaumont, it's probably the ugliest 80 miles in the United States. I've driven it a lot because I went to LSU and I went over this prison a bunch of times since then. But anyway, I sort of look up at the sky about 10:30 at night and I say, God, where are you taking me? What is this all about? And fortunately, that program worked out. They let us back in every week and we had good success. We had people from Huntsville, some of the management people came, and we had a wonderful graduation night where the guys get up and give testimonies about how they're affected. And these, great big convicts with tattoos and murderers get up there and start crying and talking about how they never thought they'd be forgiven in their life. They didn't have any hope about ever anybody forgiving them or having a hope of having a relationship with God, and hadn't had a relationship with God since they were 8 or 10 years old. And we saw these, what we call miraculous changes in movement, and men that were frozen. They had no feelings. They had been in prison for 5, 10, 15, 25 years. So out of that, we started moving forward and going to more prisons. And I won't go through a year by year, but we were able to, it was just myself as far as a staff person then we had about 20 volunteers at that time. And we started adding staff one a year, and we started going to more prisons, went to Huntsville, then we came here and went to prisons. And as the years went by, we were able to raise more funds, and we grew to where in the last 2 years, we did 41 that first year. In the last 2 years, we've graduated over 2,000 inmates each year. And we go into 24 prisons right now. We've been in 35 prisons. We'll go into Texas prisons over 900 times, 900 nights this year with groups of people. Our average group is about a 10 volunteer team and about 50 inmates. We break up into modules of 10 inmates and 2 facilitators. We have a book that's been written about us that we use in the curriculum, and a study guide that we use, and they read a chapter of this and they do a lesson in the study guide. I've got some old edition of these that we had left over up front. If y'all, when we're through tonight, if any of you want any, you're welcome to have one. But that's without going into great detail about the process. We still cover the same topics that was on that one page when I first saw it: accountability, responsibility, confession, repentance, forgiveness. We added a week on faith. We added a week on stories, the power of the story. They have to admit their crime and tell their story. They have to attend. They have to do homework. They have to write a letter to their family. They have to write a letter to their victim. They don't mail that one. And it's a very opening process where they have a confidential small group where they can open up and talk about things. So it's been amazing for me to see this happen. I had no intention of Bridges to Life ever getting as large as it is. I actually have some second thoughts because I feel like God called me to go in there and kind of put my hands on guys and deal with them, and now I'm doing different things. Father Phil came out to prison about 6 or 7 years ago, and I used to go to prison more often than I do now. I go now a lot, but I go to graduations, I go to startups, and that. We have a staff of 1, me has grown to a staff of 10. The other interesting fact is it's me and 9 females. Now, I don't know how that happened other than every staff person was a volunteer at first, and they're scattered all over Texas, in Beaumont, Tyler, Waco, San Antonio, Wimberley, Navasota, and they replicate this process, recruit volunteers, train them, and replicate this process in their area. And so we've got over 300 active volunteers. We've had over 800 volunteers since we started. We had 29,000 volunteer hours last year, because you don't come one time, you come 14 times. A volunteer comes weekly for 14 times for 2 hours at a time. To become a volunteer is you have to have a criminal background check, and you have to be approved by the state of Texas, and there's a 3-hour mandatory training by the state for security reasons, and we have some training. Fortunate enough, we've got enough experienced volunteers. We work in pairs. We put new volunteers with old, not old, but seasoned volunteers. And some of us are getting old, and some of us are young in the volunteer world. Back to the topic of forgiveness, I just want to talk a little more about that, and then maybe open it up for some questions. I think forgiveness is really at the center of the gospel. I don't know any other topic that is as important. I think God's love and forgiveness. Our spiritual mission is to show victims and inmates the transforming power of God's love and forgiveness. Once had a pastor over at St. Michael's say he gave a talk on that love was the mission, the center of the gospel, the main message. And I would say love is ahead of forgiveness. But he said a guy came up to him all red-faced afterwards and said, "No, it's obedience. Obedience." He said, "I've been obeying all these laws. It's obedience is the center of the gospel." Well, I would argue that love and forgiveness are the center of the gospel, and that's what we try to work with. Questions that I might throw out there is, why do people not forgive? As I said in the beginning, I think through my own personal journey, a lot of it, particularly in smaller things, I'm not talking about murders, is your need to be right in small things. When you hold a grudge, if it's between you and your spouse, you and your friends, I'm right. Why should I forgive this person? And you may be right, but it doesn't do you or them any good to hold on to that need to be right and that grudge and not forgive them. You cannot move on. And another question would be, what good does it do for the offender or the person that's committed an act, whether it be small, to be forgiven? And I think it frees them up quite a bit. Sometimes a person that does something offensive doesn't even know they did it and doesn't really care, but when it's something they know, it's something that they need to be able to move on with their life. And then if you are the victim in the situation, it frees you up, because you're sitting there holding all that grudge, like I was, holding all that anger, and it's I don't know anything that gives you any more freedom than being able to forgive and move on. Otherwise, you're just in a state of anger, and anger can lead to rage, and anger can lead to acting out and doing things. There's a book called Hurt People, and I think that's true. I think people that are hurt. And in the work we do in the prisons, I can see the correlation. We've worked with hundreds of them, and many of them, it never excuses what they do, but many of them have been very mistreated in their youth and their childhood. They've had childhoods. There's things that are unspeakable that have happened to them. You just almost can't believe some of the things that have happened to them when they're children. It never excuses what they did, and there's some things they've done that are unspeakable. Many of them get to a place where they think they are beyond forgiveness. They don't phrase it this way, but I'd say they think they're outside the grace of God, and I don't believe anybody's outside the grace of God. And when they go through this process and realize that another person has forgiven someone that did something to them like they've done, it opens them up. It opens them up quite a bit and opens up their spirit. And the realization that they can be forgiven gives them hope, and that's really what it's about, because when you lose hope, you're in trouble. So hope is a big part of that forgiveness. We talked to them about forgiveness on 3 levels. I would call it vertical, like God forgiving you would be what I would say vertical. That's not a theological term, but that's a John Sage term. I would talk about lateral, which would be forgiving each other, and then internal forgiveness, forgiving yourself. I've had some real brilliant theologian guys argue you can't forgive yourself, only God can, but I'm not going to, Father Phil might be smart enough to go there, but they don't have much problem, the ones that have some faith. Now, we deal with a lot of agnostics and guys that don't have much faith, believing that God will forgive them. they have much more difficulty forgiving each other. Every one of them's got some grudges against somebody. They're mad at somebody about something. But their biggest struggle is forgiving themselves. Once you tear down all the stuff and get through all that, their biggest struggle, they know that they've done some pretty horrible things, and their biggest struggle is when they're honest, is forgiving themselves. And so we work on that. We work on that issue real hard. So forgiveness is, as I said, at the core of what we do. The people that go through our program as volunteers feel like they are on a spiritual journey themselves. Most of our volunteers come back and do many programs because they feel like it's enriching to them. We've had volunteers that stop going to see psychologists, stop taking medicine, things like that, because they feel like this work helps them a whole lot. And it has been. It's been very helpful to me personally and hundreds of other people. And I feel real pleased what God has done with this ministry, and it's affected more people than I ever imagined. We have had about 12,000 inmates graduate from this program, and we probably had another 3,000 or 4,000 participate. We're doing good if we only lose about 20% during a project. There's all kind of things that happen in prison. And working in prisons is not, it's kind of dirty work. And you got to get in the trenches, and you got to put up with a lot of things. You don't have much control over things. You have security issues, guards, people that'll throw you off and try to ruin your night. And let me just say that Satan is alive and well inside. That's his domain, and I think he doesn't appreciate coming in. I think that's most of the remarks. I think I might be able to expand on some things with some questions. Can we open it up for questions? I don't know how much. I know we got probably another 15, 20 minutes. I'd like to, it would be a good time to open it up for, let me get a drink of lemonade here.
If we use your mic.
My mic is not my mic is only for this camera.
Oh, is it?
Well, we could get the questions on the camera if they spoke into the mic.
And this one. And if you want to ask a question about anything about the story that I told you, anything about my sister's murder, any of that, or about Bridges to Life, whatever, I'm open to anything.
John, my question is, you mentioned about being in the courtroom. I'm curious to know, were you there for the entire trial, what that was like, anything about that feeling, your anger, and what it was like to get the verdict, and how you reacted when that happened?
Well, I was there for the whole trial, every minute of it, and it was pretty gut-wrenching. The part that I was there that couldn't look at her, they had to publish pictures of her body. And I guess it's a legal rule. I have a brother that's a doctor, and he offered to be the person that went out the witness stand and looked at those pictures, and I wouldn't look at that. So it was traumatic, to say the least. The verdict came back quickly. They have one phase where it's guilty or not guilty, then they have a punishment phase, and both of them came back in an hour and 15 minutes. I know you're not a criminal attorney, but that's pretty fast. They have to do certain things, and you can't do it much faster. I guess my feeling was kind of like a hollow victory. I mean, I was glad to get it over with. As I had struggles with that death penalty issue, but I was glad them to be in a position that they could never get out. When the second trial ended, I had the same feelings, and I literally walked out in the parking lot down there on San Jacinto, and I kind of looked up the sky, and I said, what next? You know, where does this lead to? They've both gotten death penalty sentences. They're going to death row. It had been kind of a passion for a couple of years. It had been a project. It had been occupied my mind, and I felt, I didn't feel elated or jubilant at all. I wasn't sad, but it was, I'd say, hollow victory. It was sad, but it's just sad to see things. It was so dark, and what had happened was so bad. Yes, sir.
So my question was whether the persons who committed crimes, after being incarcerated for a certain time, maybe with your help, are they beginning to understand why they committed the crime? motivated them? Is it purely anger, or is it?
You talking about the two people that murdered my sister, or just in general the people we work with? Well, both. I'll speak to both. Well, I think the male killer had some remorse. He acted, his body language at the trial, he just had kind of a rough life since he was a kid. He seemed to have some remorse. And the fact that he was willing to meet with me through this mediation process, and they have to do preparation, they have to meet with a mediator. He was in the process of doing that. I think he had some remorse, and I'll share a little more with you about that. And the second part of the girl, I've talked to people that have met her. I've talked to female inmates that were on the unit where she was on, even though not on death row. I've talked to these guys that have met her when she was in the jail. To my knowledge, I've talked to people that have gone to see her. To my knowledge, she's not had 1 ounce of remorse, not 1 ounce of responsibility. And for someone to do that, it further, it's like a secondary crime in a way. It further devalues the life of the person they killed. I mean, it's not going to ever bring the person back, but I've seen many people in that situation where if the perpetrator does have remorse and does change, it brings something to the victim. It brings something to the victim that's very important. And so I will tell you one thing that happened that was somewhat miraculous, that actually gave me a pretty good confirmation where I stood. About 4 years ago, I was in a prison in a meeting with a warden, and there was a chaplain there, and it was in Gatesville at a men's prison, and I said, by the way, the girl that killed my sister's right down the road here. That's where the women's death row is. And I think I mentioned her name, and I didn't mention the guy's name. So a few minutes later, the chaplain starts talking back, and he mentions the guy, James Dickerson, the guy, the killer. And I said, wait a minute, I didn't say his name. How'd you know this case? So he went on to, he called me aside and we talked. He was the guy that killed my sister's last spiritual advisor before he died. And he told me some things that were very meaningful. He said he met with him in the hospital there where he had AIDS every day for several weeks. He said, and this guy's name was Hans, I think, and he was a German Catholic guy, and he was no BS type. He said, I can assure you without any doubt that this man had true remorse for what he did to your sister, true remorse for other things that he did in his life. He said, I can assure you that he was a true Christian when he died. And the amazing thing to me was I was sort of overcome with joy, and I didn't expect that feeling. Now, this is 13 years after my sister was murdered. 10 years before, I would have grabbed the guy and wanted to choke and kill him. And that was a pretty good confirmation to me that I had moved pretty far along the line of forgiveness, and he shared that with me. Then the day that happened, I was up there, and I noticed the calendar, and it was November the 21st, and that was actually my sister's birthday. So it was quite kind of like a gift from her. And that was in a strange way, that was a real good feeling for me to hear that. And I was really glad to hear what the man said about him. So he had remorse. Now, generally speaking, the guys that we work with have a low level of awareness about how many people they've hurt. I mean, a murderer knows he murdered somebody, but most of the drug dealers and the guys that steal, they don't even think about all the people. And we have a saying, there's no such thing as a victimless crime. And one of our main missions is to make them realize how many people hurt, even if they're the drug dealer on the corner. What do the people do to get the money to buy the drugs? And so we go through a whole lot of work on the responsibility and the impact. We call it the ripple effect of crime and how many people get hurt. And that's our objective by the end. If a lot of them show up and say, I didn't hurt anybody. All I do is sell drugs, just like selling another kind of merchandise. And they're going to buy it from somebody. They buy it from me. We have to get them to buy in and take a piece of the action, so to speak. There's some responsibility. You're either in the world of crime or you're out of it. So hopefully that. But it varies with them. But I would say most of the guys, and prison haven't really come to terms with what they did and how many people they've hurt. That's why half of them go back. I mean, one of the reasons. Yeah.
John, you were saying when the verdict was rendered that it was kind of a hollow victory. Did you have a moment when you felt like I've got to work, pray on it about being able to forgive them, or did it just evolve over time and you kind of got to a point I can forgive them?
Good question. Mine was sort of an evolution over time. I didn't sit down and say, well, the Lord's Prayer says, I've got to forgive them or God won't forgive me. I just tried to pursue a deeper relationship with God, and through that, I believe God gave me the grace to forgive them. I once heard a guy talk about the Lord's Prayer, and he said, forgive us our trespasses so that we may forgive others. And the part that where implies that if you don't forgive somebody, God's not going to forgive you. I'm personally not sure God's making a bargain. I think God forgives us to give us the grace to go forgive somebody else, and it's kind of a semantics type thing. But I do believe that if your heart is full of unforgiveness, you're not in a good position. But for me, it was a long process. I didn't sit down and I have some people I work with a lot that sat down and said, I have to forgive. I needed to get in a better place. I didn't like the way I was feeling. I was in a lot of pain. Yes, ma'am.
You work with Father Ron, is that the chaplain?
I know Father Ron real well. He works in the city jail, the county jails. I work in the state prisons, but I know him. And I've met him and spent time with him. He does a great job. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, we had some, one group come out a few years ago, they called us hug-a-thugs. And they thought we were a little too soft on these guys. We don't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I mean, I don't argue with them. I mean, you can't really argue. We haven't had too much of that once we got up and going pretty good. It's pretty hard to argue with what we do. I mean, we don't go in and preach. We don't go in and try to convert them. We have a big faith-based element, and we have scripture in our curriculum, but we don't proselytize. We take the Muslims, we take the atheists, the agnostic, and so that's where some of that criticism comes in when you're trying to, your only mission is to convert them. But as far as being soft on them or too nice to them, if they come to our program, they'd see we got some people that confront them pretty good. Statewide, 70% of our volunteers are female, and they actually do a better job of confronting these guys than men do. I wish it was 50-50. The perfect match in a facilitator team is a man and a woman. Here in Houston, it's a lot better because I do a lot of the recruiting. We're closer to 50%. But I don't know. We just don't get a lot. We don't get that much resistance or anti. We don't get anybody standing out there at the gate telling us not to do it. Yeah, because we're non-threatening. We're not doing any. There's nothing much they can argue with that we do or criticize other than, are we being too soft on them? But we don't. We actually are one of the few ministries that the requirement is they have to admit what they did and they have to talk about their crime, and that's a big difference in what we do and most of the prison ministries do. Yes. Recidivism. Yeah, it's on your handout you see, but normally 40 or 50% of people come back to prison within 3 years. That's kind of the national average. We've been able to improve that a lot. Now, we don't have any aftercare component. We go in and meet with them in prison for 14 weeks, and we're running about 18% of our graduates have come back to prison. But the more important statistic is only 1.2% of 3,600 that we follow in our study have come back for a violent crime where somebody did get hurt or could have got hurt. Our main mission is for them to not go hurt somebody. We don't want them, obviously we don't want them to go do drugs. We don't do any of those crimes. A lot of the ones come back and they're improving on this for parole or probation, we call technical violations, and the system is getting better on that. That was one of my biggest gripes 6-7 years ago. They're revoking less and less of them, because they were putting a lot of people back in prison for missing meetings or not paying their fine or even having a dirty UA. I mean, I don't think a guy smokes a joint, he should go back to prison for 7 years. I mean, it's just, and I've met many of them that have gone back to prison for things. I had a guy one time, he said, I've met you before, and I said, oh, you've been through the program before? He said, yeah. He was driving in East Texas, had a tail light out, and his son left a hunting knife on the floorboard of his truck. He was clean and sober, he was working, and the cop stopped him for the taillight, saw the hunting knife, and it was a violation. He goes back to prison for 2.5, 3 years. So there's a lot of people in prison that I don't think should be there. Most of them should be. This legislature's talking about cutbacks, and they want to cut back programs, cut back the things that are helping the people, even talking about cutting the chaplains out. I don't think they're going to do that. Well, if they could reduce the population 5%, which is pretty politically unpopular, particularly in Texas, they could solve the problem. And I can promise you that 1 out of 20 of these guys could get out of prison if they were carefully screened, because they keep them a long time. And I'm not soft on crime. I think they deserve to be punished. We're part of what's called restorative justice, and it includes punishment, but it also includes rehabilitation. But we're real pleased with the recidivism. Obviously, we wish none of them would come back, but we're real pleased with the effort and the statistics we have, and we're real pleased with the movement they have. This program will meet them wherever they are. It'll meet the guy that's an atheist. It'll meet the guy that says he's a Christian. It'll bring them a step forward, because we don't judge them. We try to be open. We listen. We do a lot of listening, and we ask a lot of questions and do a lot of listening. I was telling a guy the other day, I got real intrigued with the fact that Jesus asked so many questions. I went in the Gospels a few years back, and he asked 245 questions in the 4 Gospels. Luke, he has 95. So he taught by asking questions. A lot of times someone would ask him a question, he'd ask, go in there and count. I didn't believe it. But so we try to ask questions and listen, and that's what we try to train our facilitators to do, is not preach, not give a lot of advice, not lecture, but we tell them we think their answers are within them if they can just get the garbage out and ask the right questions and have them get honest. And they tell us things they've never told anybody in their life, and it's very cleansing to them. What we do has a lot of elements of AA. It has some. It's not a Bible study. It's not AA. It's kind of in between. It's a faith-based restorative justice. It's a get honest and talk about their personal lives and talk about change. It's about change and healing would probably be the 2 main words that I would put on our program. We had a Harvard professor come down, and he was interviewing us for an award, and he asked to put one word on it. Well, fortunately, we had a St. Agnes English professor he's a member of this church. Charles Novo was in the car, and he said change. And so he gave the Harvard professor a good one word, but I would say change or healing would fit in our program, both for the inmates and for the volunteers. The biggest surprise to me has been how much the volunteers have gotten out of it. It takes a lot of time, but they take their own time, their own gasoline, and these prisons are not close by, and they look forward to it, and they come once a week. We usually do one project in the spring and one in the fall at each prison. We'll do about 55 to 60 projects this year. Our newest thing, we're working in 3 juvenile facilities. Started a year and a half ago, and that's been trying. It's much more difficult than with the adults. These are 13 to 17-year-olds. We work in the toughest juvenile facility out by Katy in Harris County. And but we're making progress. We're seeing some good things happen. It's taken a lot of cooperation. We developed a whole nother curriculum for the juveniles. So we're doing that. We've got an effort in San Antonio in a large homeless shelter that we're dealing with a lot of the ex-felons there. So the process has an application a lot of places. But we always, you've heard me talk about volunteers. We're a growing organization. We always need volunteers. If you have any interest, I've got some material up here. If you want to just read more about what we do, I brought about 20 of these. If anybody wants one, I got them there in a box, and you're welcome to take this with you. If you're interested in volunteering, you can. We've got a website. It's on there. It's on that handout, bridgestolife.org. A lot of material on there. We've been fortunate enough to get a lot of media because what we do is real unique. The only other organization I've found that's done anything like we've done in any kind of volume is in England. And I talked to people over there, but no, they have people come into prison and speak, and they come in one time, but nobody's really done the volume of work we've done with the process that we've done. So we're pleased with that. I don't know, some states it may not work. Works good because we're down here in the Bible Belt, so to speak, in Texas, and we can get by that church-state issue. We've had 2 states just actually turn us down, North Carolina and Utah, and I don't know if it's a church-state issue, but they're just resistant to anything new. Our curriculum is used in Florida, it's been used in Louisiana, Colorado, and Indiana, and we don't spend any money out of state, but if they want to use our curriculum, they can, and we teach them what we know. I've talked to people from all over the country, and they're really interested in the curriculum. They think it's great, but when they see how much work it takes and how many volunteers it takes, they lose interest. And I think we've been able to succeed because we've been fortunate enough to have people that would donate so we could have some staff to manage all these volunteers. But the value of our volunteer hours at a nominal rate exceeds our budget every year. So but it takes a lot of management to work with these prisons. There's always a problem, and there's always something going on. We had a guy 2 nights ago have a pack of cigarettes in his boot when he went into prison, and he's through. The warden said he can never come back. And in a maximum security prison like that, you have to take off your shoes and they check you out. I'm not a smoker, so I didn't know that's a normal place to carry cigarettes, but I guess it is. But there's a lot of strange stories that happen, but when you deal with hundreds of people, a lot of things happen. We've had a minimum amount of problems for the number of times that we go in and things that could happen. And we've had really no problems from inmates, ever inappropriately touching anyone or any vicious words, or there's some confrontation that goes on in these groups, but it's in a controlled, appropriate fashion. Anybody got any other questions? Yeah. I think part of it is the process of showing them love, and they're a very fertile mission field in that they haven't seen love. They don't know what love looks like. So we go in there, and the first few weeks are wondering, what are these people's agenda? What are they getting out of it? So I think by showing them love, it gives them some worth. It gives them more self-worth. And I think the more self-worth and the more you can feel or realize God's love, the more you can forgive yourself. And it's the toughest part of it. They have they'll say, I think God, murderers say, I think God forgives me. And then you can say, well, if God forgives you, who are you not to forgive yourself? I mean, you can do things like that, but I think it's a slow process, and I'm not sure everyone we work with does that. We plant the seeds, but and I think if you think about it in your own life, sometimes we beat ourselves up a lot and have a hard time forgiving ourselves. That's kind of sometimes the last step for people that aren't criminals. But I think the realization of God's love is probably the biggest step. And you're talking about kids 10 years old. Most people are a lot older than that before they realize that. I feel like I was my mid-40s before I had the true realization of God's love. And y'all we're all Catholics, so I can tell this story. I went back and got a Baltimore Catechism, 1964. And I was upset that the Catholic nuns didn't teach me how much God loved me. And I could not find in that Baltimore Catechism where it said God loved me. I found one little old phrase in there, but it was more on the punishment side. So I'm a recovering Catholic. No, anyway, but I think the realization of God's love is a big step. So it's in some of these, as you know, these questions don't have easy answers. You just got to work with them. You had a question, sir? Faith and family. I mean, that's sort of maybe an obvious answer, but I think someone asked me if my Catholic faith helped me a lot, and I said, yeah, it helped me, gave me a foundation and a rock to go back to. It was just solid. I mean, there were some givens in my life that I knew from a little kid going through St. Anne's and St. Thomas, and I think I could go back to that. That helped me a lot. And then the value of my family, I never really got angry at God. A lot of people in that situation do, and that's okay. But so I guess those two things, that's pretty basics. But it was a struggle. It was a real struggle. I think just having that internal anger and I mean I was 46 years old. I almost got in a fight out in Sam's parking lot. I almost got in a fight with a guy in a garage over in Post Oak that year after my sister was murdered. I mean, I was like water at 200 degrees. Just needed a little bit more to boil it. And I'm not ashamed of it, I'm not proud of it, but that's just the way it was. It was just a real difficult battle and struggle to get over it. And it does help when something big like that. It does help you forgive smaller things in your life that people do. It helps you in that process. And that shows that, you know, those guys say, look, if these inmates say, if these people can forgive people that did those things, God, I can forgive the guy that disrespected me in the food line today. I mean, there are literally people killed, not every day, killed in prison for disrespecting a guy by stepping in front of him in the food line. They have a whole big deal on respect, a whole distorted idea of respect and a whole different way of living in there. It's a different culture. And I've had guys look at me and say, you know, I was born into this life. I'll never have a life like you normal people will. We just go in there and kind of show up and show them what, I hate to say normal, but what people act like. Yeah, what other people act like, and show them, I think just listening to them. I had a Spanish guy one time, he was in the first day, he said, I don't speak very good English, okay? So we got him to open up, and boy, he was speaking real good English, and he said, I've been in prison 15 years. He said, this is the most I ever talked in one day. Well, what he was really saying is, this is the first time somebody's ever listened to me in 15 years, and that was a meaningful, that's a typical thing. They're not, those people aren't born bad. They're not born any different than us. I mean, you cut them, they bleed red, and they just had a lot of circumstances, and they made some bad decisions, and some of them need to stay in prison for a long time. Some of them need to stay in prison forever. But I think some of them can change. We're just trying to move the bar and help the ones that we can. Yes, ma'am.
I work with the Ministries of Texas, and we minister to the juveniles. And I just came from a retreat 2 weeks ago. But you're right, these young men, they're there. They have a lot of anger in them, and a lot of love and attention. And if you don't help them with that, they eventually will just do what's up for let them say they don't care what happens to them, what they do. They don't have regard for people. So we need to reach them at the juvenile.
Yeah, the juveniles, that's the biggest difference I've seen. The juveniles just don't even care about their own lives. They don't think about tomorrow much. The adult prisoners seem to, want to do something with their lives, even if they're in prison. But the juveniles, they don't seem to care, and they're dangerous.
It's the brain development and their experiences at that age.
Their risk assessment, they just can't.
As an adulthood.
My wife's worked with me a lot in the juvenile, and when we did the juvenile, she felt a lot more at risk working the juvenile. She said these kids don't have good sense, so they're liable to come over to your house and do something where the adults obviously can't. But so the juveniles are a much tougher nut to crack.
They don't know how to forgive themselves. They don't.
Yeah, do you get that far with them? We try. We can get that far with the adults, but I don't even know if they understand forgiveness. They're just in the survival mode. I mean, every one of them, they're packing guns when they're 14, 15 years old, and they're in gangs, and they live in the streets. Well, Father, you got any
No more questions?
comments?
Comment?
Proud of you.
Well, the
Well, thank
work you do is just
Thank you, appreciate it.